Hello. What to do in your garden in January. I often get asked if there are things that we can do in our garden in January, and for most of the time I would say, stay inside and have the best garden there is, the one that you imagine. But there are things that we can do in the garden. In fact, there are plenty of things we can do on days like today when the sun is shining, and although it's bitterly cold, there's almost no wind. This is a really nice time to get out, have a bit of fresh air, enjoy that sunshine, and maybe potter in the garden. So today I'm going to look at some of the things that you can do throughout January, but don't feel obliged to. There's no must about it. I'm Zorab, and this is Byther Farm. Many garden weeds continue to grow right through the winter, so if you get a chance to remove some of the weeds, then that just means when the weather does warm up again, you've kind of got a head start on the season. I know in previous years where I've just left the weeds in the bed, and so by the time I get to April and things get busy in the garden, I actually feel so demoralised about the state of the beds that I've just left them for a whole year to grow even more weedy, or I've just covered them with tarp and not faced them until the year after. So looking back the other way down the vegetable garden, I've dealt with the weedy beds. I've still got the weedy beds to go on this side, but that's just a small area now. So I'm really pleased to say this year I'm starting to go through the beds one by one, get out as many weeds as possible, so I can start my growing year with clear beds that have only got the vegetables and fruits in them that should be growing in them, and not all those pesky weeds. Once you've cleared an area of a growing bed, it's actually worth mulching it to prevent the weeds from growing back, and this will protect the soil from wind and rain. Over time, it'll help improve the soil structure, the nutrient content, and the microbiology that is going on in your soil, and that's all important. Now, I know you can mulch on top of frozen ground, but I prefer not to. I tend to wait until the frost has thawed a bit, and then I will put on a nice layer of mulch. Doesn't need to be much, somewhere between 2.5 and 5 centimetres, that's 1 to 2 inches. It's absolutely as much as you need. One fairly quick and easy task to do is to pick up any pots that you've left lying around, any seed trays, or bags of stuff. My garden has quite lots of bags of stuff in it. If you can pick this up and move it away from your beds, there'll just be fewer places for the slugs and snails to hide and to overwinter, and fewer trip hazards, and it's just going to look nicer too. If you have winter flowering plants like violas or pansies, keep on deadheading them, because the more you deadhead them, the more that will encourage new flowers to grow, and they give such a cheerful, wonderful display in the coldest months of the year. I propagate so many plants, and I used to find it really difficult to remember which seeds I'd sown where and when I'd taken cuttings, or even where I'd planted things. And so I started keeping a journal and writing everything down. So I've now created this. It's a vegetable garden planner and journal, and there's masses of space in it for you to take notes and observations, to write down when you've sown seeds or taken cuttings, and even where you've planted them. I include a vegetable sowing guide, so that's times when you can sow various different vegetables. There's some information about perennial veg and also about composting. And all the way through, there are some hints and tips and some words of encouragement to keep you going in your garden. You can order your copy of a journal either direct on our website at bytherfarm.com or through Amazon. Any time between December and the end of March, it's a really good time to prune roses. And most roses produce flowers on this year's growth. So they'll grow from February or March onwards, and then they'll produce a flower on that wood that they've produced. So to keep a good shape to your plant and keep a good framework to your climber, you need to cut them back to encourage lots of new growth, which means lots of new roses. But of course there are exceptions, and the main exception to this is for rambling roses, which flower on last year's growth. So my advice is really don't touch ramblers unless they have completely outgrown their space, but back to roses that flower on this year's growth. Now for shrub roses, I like to take them really down low so that the shrub sort of stays within its allotted space. And for climbers, I would take them really low, but actually most of my climbers I want them to to cover a larger area. So I'm doing that process. I'm taking out about 1/3 of the stems to allow those to produce new growth low down, and that's where there'll be some of the flowers for this year, and then the other stems I'm allowing to grow on so that I get flowers higher up. Now, as I'm talking to you, I can see the local robin flitting around, and so it's a quick reminder that if you do feed wild birds, you need to continue to feed them, particularly in this frozen weather, and don't forget to put out some water for them as well so they can access fresh water. It's also a really good time to start thinking about clearing out nesting boxes if you have those. Certainly you want to have done that by the middle of February, because wild birds are going to start thinking about building their nests from mid-February onwards. I always think January is a really good time to walk around your garden and see where the gaps are in terms of winter colour or winter fragrance, and head to the garden centre or look online and buy something that's going to meet my needs in terms of providing extra colour in winter, some interesting buds or catkins or bark colour. It's also not too late to plant bulbs. If you haven't already got your daffodils, tulips, alliums and all those other spring bulbs in, it's not too late. Get them into the ground. They may flower a bit later, but later is better than never, and you really don't want to waste all those lovely bulbs that you've bought by just leaving them in their packet to rot. And talking of planting things, there's still plenty of time to plant bare root trees and bare root roses. These are usually cheaper than buying them in a pot, and they're going to arrive with their roots bare. It means they won't have any soil or compost on them. And what you need to do is give them a good soak for maybe half an hour to 2 hours to really allow those roots to absorb some water. Dig a hole, put your tree in and plant it at the same level that it was when it came out of the ground, and you'll be able to see on the stem where the soil level was. And spread the roots out and then backfill it. It's no longer recommended that you enrich that hole with extra compost or feed. What you really want to do is just put the same soil back on, and that will make the roots go out looking for nutrients, and as they go out they're going to anchor that tree even better into the ground, and they'll find nutrients further away. You'll have a more stable tree, and that will actually grow away faster. And the same thing applies for bare root roses. Get them into the ground, but actually plant them deeper than they were before. You'll see on most roses that they've been grafted. So you'll see the rootstock, and then you'll see if that's your rootstock, there's then the stem, and you'll find there's almost like a little knuckle. And if you can get that under the ground by 1 or 2 inches, it will help prevent suckers from the root stock growing, and that way the nutrients aren't taken away from the variety that you actually want to grow, and all the nutrients will go up the main stem and into the plant, produce you some lovely rose flowers this year. And while you're out looking at any trees, don't forget to check tree stakes and their ties, particularly after the stormy weather. Just check that they're not rocking, that they're tied tightly, or that they haven't come undone completely. And if necessary, put in an additional stake or 2 to provide extra stability for your trees and plants. If you have autumn fruiting raspberries, well, they produce fruit on this year's growth, whereas summer fruiting variety produce fruit on last year's growth. But for now, I'm just going to talk about autumn fruiting raspberries, and January is an ideal time to cut those right down to the ground. It will encourage them to send up lots of new growth. The stems are ideal for going onto the compost, but make sure that you've cut them into small bits first. You can just break them up by hand, but wear really sturdy gloves because the stems are very prickly. Now is also a great time to prune gooseberries and red currants and white currants. You're aiming to make a goblet shape that's nice and open in the centre that will allow plenty of airflow. So remove any branches that are crossing and touching. You don't want any that are going to rub on each other. Remove any that are clogging up the centre. You can take out some old growth, some of the maybe 3 or 4 year old growth, And basically you want to leave it so that the air will flow through, the lights can get to it, and it'll be really easy for you to access the plants. And one of the things with gooseberries is that the stems are quite flexible and they will bend quite a bit with the weight of the fruit. So if you've got any branches that are really close to the ground, it's worth removing those so they don't just lie on the ground and allow slugs and other wildlife to access your fruit. But with the gooseberries, unless you have a thornless variety, and even my thornless ones have got a couple of thorns on them, make sure that you're wearing gloves and be very careful how you handle the stems. When you buy seed potatoes, don't leave them in their packaging or in a dark box. Get them out of their packaging, spread them out somewhere that's cool and very bright. This means that they won't grow long white stems or long purple stems as they're looking for light. They will grow very short, dark green, maybe even dark purpley green. Sprouts coming with the first few leaves. Those are great. Those mean that when you get them into the ground, they'll grow away really quickly. So it needs to be cool and it needs to be dark. You don't need to water them. You don't need to do anything to them. I think that the egg boxes are a great way to store them. So you open an egg box out and you put one potato in each of the sections, and then you can put some more in the lid. I quite like to have them not touching too much, just in case one does go mouldy and go rotten. I don't want that to spread to all the other potatoes it's touching. Both in the ornamental and in the veg garden, now is a great time to lift and divide herbaceous perennials. In the veg garden, things like chives can be lifted. Use a spade to chop through those roots, and one clump like that will turn into many clumps of chives if you want them. If not, why not pot them up to be able to give to friends or to donate at a seed swap. So sweet peas in pots. I try to make sure they're not actually touching the ground, so I put them up on a raise, and in fact I like to put them on a hanging platform just to stop any of the local wildlife helping themselves. Rhubarb crowns can be covered with a forcing pot, and if you don't have a specialised rhubarb forcing pot, use any kind of pot you have. Place it over the plant, and you will need to either pin it down with some sort of and you can see this is not easy today because the ground is frozen, but you can hold it down with pegs. You can put a stone on the top to stop it blowing around. For best results, you want to have no holes in your container. But if you're going to put a stone over the top, you can cover up the holes using that. And this will warm up the air on the inside, which will encourage the plant to grow more. And because of the lack of light, you're going to get long, thin, very tender stems. And this will provide you with an early crop, very sweet, very tasty rhubarb. And lastly, but I think most importantly, make sure you come outside. Enjoy some of that winter sunshine, get a bit of fresh air, and just enjoy your garden. Now there are some seeds that you can sow with some heat, and some vegetables that if you want to grow, they need a really long growing time. And if you want to know more about those, well, I've made a video and I'll leave a link on the screen, and if you click on that, it'll take you straight through to my What to Sow in January video.